As part of the project Yes for Peace, Young Engaged Syrians Making Their Voices Heard, the European Center for Kurdish Studies organized a workshop titled Governance in Transition: Perspectives on Decentralization in Syria, from July 3rd to July 6th, 2025. The event took place in cooperation with the Protestant Academy in Loccum near Hanover. After years of work on topics such as constitutionalism, federalism, and decentralization, the ECKS decided to focus on young Syrians between the ages of 20 and 35.
We've been working a lot with the Syrian opposition. We started to work with the Syrian opposition indeed in 2016, first with the Kurdish National Council, then with other minority groups, and later then with the mainstream opposition, so to say, which means Arab Sunnis, more or less. So we try to include as many different groups as possible, really, particularly with regard to different ethnicities, different religions, etc. But there was one point that was definitely missing, that is, we only worked with older people, meaning 50 plus, something like this. Why did we do so? Because in most of the parties, be it Kurdish political parties or other Syrian parties, in most institutions, for example, the SNC or the Constitutional Committee, the members were, well, older people who had already made their careers and who are now in a position to be part of these institutions. And so this is why we worked with them. On the opposite, you know that the majority of people in Syria is quite young, it's like under 30. And I think no one of those people we worked with was under 30, definitely nobody. And I mean, it's not only that certain group is missing, but the point is the group which has to live for the longest time with the decisions taken now is the group which was missing. And this is why we said, okay, it doesn't work like this anymore. Now we're going to try to involve younger people, and we said we want to work with people being between like 20 and 35, and this is why we decided to include a different group of people, that is young people, and to do the concept like that in October.
On the one hand, the killing of hundreds of Alawite civilians by government troops in the Latakia region in March 2025 provided the political backdrop to the workshop. On the other hand, the agreement between Syria's transitional president al-Shara and SDF leader Mazloum Abdi dominated the Syrian debate. The agreement postulates the complete integration of the autonomous region of northeast Syria, administered by the PYD, into the centralist structures of the Syrian state, a concept that all Syrian Kurdish parties reject. The first day of the workshop began with the participants discussing their preliminary understanding of the concepts of federalism, decentralization, and power sharing, followed by a presentation by federalism expert Dr. Zoran Kyle on the political structures of various federal states, with a focus on Germany and Nigeria. After the presentation, participants asked about the extent to which Western concepts of federalism are applicable to the Syrian context.
In general, federalism is just basically a concept of a division of powers on territorial means. Where you have a union level or central level, regional levels and local levels. How that's operationalized is very different from each federal system to another. There isn't a standard model of federalism. There isn't, like some people say, oh, look at Switzerland. The US, of course, has been very influential as the oldest federation. But when we look at newer federations in which federalism mainly serves the idea of holding countries together and addressing conflicts between different groups by providing autonomy and territorial integrity at the same time, then there's very little we can actually learn from the US, for example. Each country needs to find its own path to federalism. There isn't just one perfect federal idea that we can just copy, paste, and apply, and everything will be great.
A key finding of the discussion was that there is a need to develop criteria to determine whether the federal structures that are being implemented can be considered successful. These criteria may vary from case to case. As an example, Zoran Kyle pointed out that the Bosnian model, despite numerous problems, has been successful in bringing about peace between the different ethnic groups. Since the Dayton Peace Agreement in December 1995, which resulted in a new Bosnian constitution, no one has been killed as a result of the conflict. The first day of the workshop ended with a panel discussion with Thomas van der Oosten-Zakken and Søren Keil concerning the question whether Iraq's model of federalism should be regarded as a success or whether Iraq should be considered a failed state. The second day of the workshop began with a discussion between Dr. Zeydoun al-Zobi and Hawaz Zeydoun. Since federalism is often associated with fears of separatism, Zeydoun al-Zobi spoke about possible alternative terms and different approaches to stimulate discussions about political change in Syria. He argued that federalist forms of governance have existed in the region since a long time, including in the Ottoman Empire. While these have had a positive effect on society as a whole, the narrative on decentralization was constantly changing. In Syria, many topics are demonized. For example, some people perceive the term decentralization as a threat of partition to the country, even though all developed countries in the world rely on decentralization. The same applies to the term federalism. Many immediately think it means secession. There are numerous elites in society who do not distinguish between federalism, confederalism, and political decentralization. The problem of terminology plays a very important role in Syria. If you use a word which falls within the scope of what we reject, we can no longer hear anything else. That is why I ask either for a precise explanation of the terms, which requires a lot of effort, and I personally am already very exhausted by it, or for these terms to be avoided altogether. Hawaz Zeydoun spoke about the development of the Kurdish position on federalism and argued that federalism is not an unfamiliar concept for the Kurds either. Afterwards, under the guidance of Sabah al-Halak, Zeydoun al-Zobi and Hawaz Zeydoun, the participants discussed the topics of human rights, creation of regions, and distribution of powers, and devised strategies for implementation in Syria. Throughout the workshop, it became apparent that many of the young workshop participants had much more prior knowledge of concepts such as decentralization and federalism than members of older generations. In addition, the younger participants showed much more openness towards new concepts and ideas. However, compared to participants from previous workshops, this group had a surprisingly limited understanding of Syrians from other regions with different religious or ethnic backgrounds, and few, if any, had personal connections with them. A key benefit of the workshop was thus the fact that Syrians from diverse backgrounds were brought together for the first time, allowing them to get to know one another and collaborate on ideas for a future democratic Syria.